By the time I reached the river, the last light had almost disappeared. The sky was a deep shade of blue, slowly turning black above the trees. Cold wind moved through the reeds along the shore, carrying the smell of rain and wet earth. I stood there with one small bag in my hand. That was all I had left. One bag, tired jacket, and a decision I had been trying to make for almost 3 months. I needed to get to the other side. There was a small town beyond the river where I had found a temporary place to stay. It was not much, but it was far enough from everything I was leaving behind. Far enough from memories. Far enough from him. I looked toward the water. The river was wider than I had imagined. Its surface reflected the last gray light of evening, broken by slow ripples that moved toward the opposite bank. There was only one boat still there. A small wooden passenger boat, tied to an old post near the shore. A man was standing beside it. He looked to be in his early 30s. Dark hair. A worn jacket. Quiet eyes. He was checking the rope around the boat when he noticed me. His gaze moved from my face to the bag in my hand, then toward the river. "You're trying to cross?" he asked. His voice was calm. I nodded. "Yes." He looked at the sky. Then he looked back at me. "Not tonight." I frowned. "Why?" "The current gets stronger after dark. I can pay extra." He gave me a faint, almost tired smile. "That isn't the problem." I looked toward the river again. "I need to get across." Something in my voice must have told him more than I intended. He studied me for a moment. Not suspiciously. More like he was trying to understand something I had not said. "You've traveled far," he said. "Far enough." Running from something? The question caught me off guard. I looked at him. He seemed to realize he had gone too far. "Sorry," he said quietly. "None of my business." I should have been annoyed. Instead, I almost smiled. "No, you're right." He waited. I didn't explain. There were some stories I wasn't ready to tell a stranger. Maybe I wasn't ready to tell anyone. He untied the rope, then secured it again. Finally, he pointed toward the covered part of the boat. "You can stay here tonight." I stared at him. "On the boat?" "It's safer than walking around here in the dark." I hesitated. Every sensible thought in my head told me not to spend the night alone with a stranger. But there was something strangely gentle about him. He wasn't trying to convince me. He wasn't asking questions. He was simply offering a place to wait. "What about you?" I asked. "I sleep here sometimes." "That sounds uncomfortable." He shrugged. "You get used to things." I understood that sentence more than I wanted to. I stepped onto the boat. The wooden floor moved slightly beneath my shoes. The man reached out instinctively when I lost my balance. His hand closed around my arm. For one brief second, neither of us moved. His hand was warm. Mine was cold. He let go first. "Careful," he said. "Thanks." "My name's Mason." I looked at him. "Caleb." He nodded. "Caleb." The way he said my name was strangely soft. I looked away before he could notice how much that affected me. Mason disappeared beneath the small cabin and returned with a blanket. He handed it to me. "There isn't much here. This is enough." He also gave me a cup of tea. I held it between both hands. The warmth slowly reached my fingers. We sat several feet apart. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Usually, silence made me uncomfortable. That night, it didn't. The river moved quietly beneath us. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled across the sky. Mason looked toward the clouds. "Rain's coming." I noticed. "You should get some sleep." "I don't think I can." He glanced at me. "Bad night." I looked down at the tea. "Bad year." He didn't ask another question. That was the first thing I liked about him. Most people wanted explanations. Mason seemed willing to accept silence. Eventually, I told him a little. Not everything. Just enough. I said I had trusted someone who didn't deserve it. I said I had spent too long believing that person would stay. And I said that when everything finally ended, I realized I had been the only one trying to save something that was already gone. Mason listened. His expression barely changed, but his eyes did. Something darker moved behind them. I know that feeling, he said. I looked up. You do? He nodded. I used to. What happened? He stared at the river. Someone I trusted left. There was something about his voice that made me believe the sentence was much bigger than it sounded. Did you love them? He was quiet for a long time. Yes. The answer was almost a whisper. I looked away. I didn't know why hearing that hurt. Maybe because I had started wondering what it would feel like to be loved by someone like Mason. Someone quiet. Someone careful. Someone who seemed to understand pain without needing it explained. The rain began softly against the roof. Mason moved a little closer and pulled the cabin door shut. For the first time, we were surrounded by darkness, rain, and the gentle movement of the river. I pulled the blanket around my shoulders. You're sure I can stay? Mason looked at me. You don't have to ask again. Something in my chest tightened. I nodded. Thank you. He gave me a small smile. Then he looked toward the water. I watched him for a moment. There was loneliness in his face. The kind that doesn't come from being alone. The kind that comes from having once had someone beside you and losing them. Hours passed. I eventually fell asleep. When I woke, the rain had stopped. Mason was sitting near the edge of the boat, staring across the dark river. I didn't know how long he had been there. Can't sleep? I asked. He turned. Not really. I sat beside him. The air smelled clean after the rain. For a while, we watched the water together. Then I asked the question that had been sitting inside me all night. Do you ever wish you could leave everything behind? Mason looked toward the opposite shore. His face was almost impossible to read. After a long silence, he said, I already did once. I looked at him. He didn't explain. And somehow I knew he wouldn't. Not yet. The river kept moving beneath us. Morning was still hours away. But for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't afraid of what tomorrow might bring. I was only afraid that when morning came, Mason and I would become strangers again. Morning came quietly. I woke to the sound of water tapping against the side of the boat. For a few seconds, I didn't remember where I was. Then I saw the narrow window, the folded blanket beside me, and the faint sunlight spreading across the cabin. Mason was already awake. He stood outside, holding one of the ropes while preparing the boat. The morning light touched the side of his face. He looked different in daylight, less guarded, almost peaceful. I stepped outside. Morning. He turned and smiled. Morning, Caleb. Hearing my name again made something warm move through me. I tried not to show it. How long have you been awake? Long enough. That doesn't answer my question. He smiled slightly. You ask a lot of questions. Only when people avoid answering them. He laughed softly. It was the first time I had heard him laugh. The sound surprised me. It was quiet, almost shy, as if he wasn't used to letting himself be heard. For some reason, I wanted to hear it again. Instead, I looked toward the river. The storm had disappeared. The water was calm beneath the pale morning sky. Mason untied the boat. We should cross now. I nodded. I picked up my bag. But before stepping toward the front of the boat, I stopped. Thank you. For what? For letting me stay. Mason looked at me for a moment. You needed somewhere safe. The simple answer stayed with me. We began moving across the river. The engine was quiet, and the shoreline slowly moved behind us. I watched the place I had come from disappear. Part of me felt relieved. Another part felt strangely sad. I had spent so long wanting to escape that I had never considered how strange leaving could feel. Mason stood at the controls. His eyes remained focused on the water. I watched him. There was something steady about him. He seemed like the kind of person who knew exactly what to do when everything went wrong. I wondered what had happened to make him that way. You're staring, he said. I quickly looked away. I wasn't. You were. I was looking at the river. The river is behind me. I smiled despite myself. Maybe I was looking past you. He glanced back. Sure. There was something different between us that morning. Something neither of us mentioned. The night had created a quiet familiarity. We were still strangers. But not completely. After a while, Mason handed me a rope. Hold this. What for? You wanted to help. I took it. Our fingers touched. Neither of us moved immediately. Then Mason looked away. I did the same. The moment was small, almost meaningless. But I remembered it for the rest of the day. When we reached the middle of the river, Mason asked about my destination. I told him the name of the town. You know anyone there? No. He looked surprised. Then why go? Because nobody there knows me. He understood immediately. Sometimes that's exactly what someone needs. I looked at him. You've done that too? Once. Left somewhere without knowing anyone? Yes. What happened? He was quiet. Then he said, I survived. I smiled faintly. That sounds cheerful. It wasn't meant to. We both laughed. The boat continued forward. For the first time in months, I felt something close to normal. Not happy. Not healed. Just calm. And somehow that felt more valuable. Then I noticed something. Mason wore a thin silver chain around his neck. A small metal ring hung from it. I asked if it had belonged to someone. His hand immediately touched the chain. Yes. The warmth disappeared from his expression. Someone important? He looked toward the shore. Once. I knew I should stop asking, but curiosity got the better of me. Do you still love them? His eyes met mine. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. No. The answer was quiet, but something about it sounded unfinished. I didn't push him. Later, when Mason went below deck to check something, I noticed an old photograph tucked beneath a wooden seat. I picked it up. There were two men standing beside the boat. One was Mason. Younger. Happier. The other man had his arm around Mason's shoulder. They looked close. Very close. I heard footsteps. Quickly turned. Mason stood at the cabin entrance. His expression changed when he saw the photograph. He walked toward me. Where did you find that? Under the seat. He took it from my hand. His fingers tightened around the picture. Who is he? Mason looked at the photograph. For the first time since I had met him, I saw anger in his face. Not loud anger. Something quieter. Something older. Someone I should have forgotten. He put the photograph away. I wanted to ask more. Instead, I said, I'm sorry. He nodded. It's okay. But it wasn't. I could feel that. The rest of the journey became quieter. When we finally reached the opposite shore, Mason tied the boat near the dock. I stepped onto the wooden platform. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt disappointed. I looked back at him. So this is goodbye? Mason's eyes softened. I suppose it is. The words hurt more than they should have. Before I could answer, Mason looked toward the sky. Dark clouds were gathering again. We should wait. Why? Another storm is coming. I looked at the clouds. He was right. Rain was already beginning to fall in the distance. Mason untied the boat again. I stepped back inside. Neither of us said anything about the fact that we were both relieved. We returned to the sheltered part of the boat. For a while, I watched the rain through the window. Then Mason's phone vibrated. He looked at the screen. His face became pale. He turned the phone over. I pretended not to notice. But a second later, another message arrived. This time, I saw the first few words before he could hide it. You can't keep hiding what happened. Mason stared at the screen. I looked at him. Is everything okay? He didn't answer. Mason. He finally raised his eyes. There was fear there. Real fear. And suddenly, I understood something. The man sitting beside me wasn't simply carrying an old heartbreak. He was hiding a secret someone else clearly knew. And for the first time since I stepped onto that boat, I wondered whether staying beside Mason was the safest thing I could have done. Or the most dangerous. The rain grew heavier that afternoon. It covered the river in a silver curtain and blurred the opposite shore until everything looked distant. Mason sat near the cabin window, staring at his phone. He hadn't spoken for almost 20 minutes. I watched him from the other side of the small cabin. There was something different about him now. The man who had offered me tea, a blanket, and a safe place to sleep seemed to have disappeared. In his place was someone carrying a fear he didn't know how to hide. I finally broke the silence. Who was that message from? Mason looked at me. Someone from my past. The man in the photograph? His jaw tightened. Yes. I waited. His eyes returned to the rain. His name is Derek. I remembered the photograph. Derek had looked confident, comfortable, like someone who believed the world belonged to him. How long were you together? Mason didn't answer immediately. Almost 5 years. 5 years. The number felt heavier than I expected. I looked down at my hands. And you said you don't love him anymore. I don't. His answer came quickly. I believed him. At least I wanted to. But something inside me had already begun to change. I didn't like imagining Mason with someone else. That realization frightened me. We had known each other for barely 2 days. Yet the thought of him belonging to another person made my chest tighten. I had no right to feel jealous. Mason had never promised me anything. Still, jealousy didn't care about logic. It simply appeared. Quietly. Painfully. Mason noticed my silence. You're upset. No. You are. I looked at him. Maybe I just don't understand. Understand what? What this is. The words left my mouth before I could stop them. Mason stared at me. I continued. You've been kind to me. You've told me things you probably don't tell strangers. Then suddenly, someone from your past starts messaging you. He looked away. I don't know what I'm supposed to think. You don't have to think anything. That would be easier if I didn't care. The cabin became completely silent. Mason slowly looked back at me. What did you say? I swallowed. I said I care. His expression softened. For a moment, I thought he might say something. Instead, he looked down. I don't want you involved in this. Why? Because Derek doesn't let things go. What did he do? Mason closed his eyes. Then he leaned back against the wall. He betrayed me. The words were simple. But his voice wasn't. I waited. Mason finally began talking. Years ago, he and Derek had planned to build a business together. The boat was part of that dream. Mason had trusted Derek with their savings, paperwork, and several important payments. Then one day the money was gone. So was Derek. Mason had been left with debts he couldn't afford. The business disappeared before it had even begun. I thought he loved me, Mason said. His voice became quieter. I thought we were building something together. What happened? He was building something for himself. I didn't know what to say. Mason looked toward the river. I spent years blaming myself. Why? Because I should have known. I shook my head. No. He looked at me. Trusting someone doesn't make you stupid. His eyes stayed on mine. I could see how badly he wanted to believe that. But some wounds become habits. Mason had spent years punishing himself for trusting the wrong person. The rain continued outside. I moved closer. Not too close. Just enough to let him know he wasn't alone. Did you ever forgive him? Mason gave a bitter smile. No. Do you want to? I don't know. I nodded. I understand. He looked at me. You do. I took a slow breath. My former partner betrayed me too. Mason's expression changed. I had never told anyone the full story. But something about that boat made secrets feel heavier. He told me I was everything he wanted, I said. Then he changed. Mason listened. He started becoming distant. He stopped answering questions. Whenever I asked what was wrong, he said I was imagining things. I looked toward the rain. Eventually, I found out he had been seeing someone else. Mason's face tightened. What happened? I left. Just like that. No. I gave a small smile. It took me almost a year. Mason didn't interrupt. I kept thinking I could make him love me again. My voice became quieter. Eventually, I realized I was trying to win back someone who had already decided to leave. Mason looked at me for a long moment. Then he reached across the small space between us. His hand rested over mine. The touch was gentle, careful. Neither of us spoke. For once, I didn't pull away. His thumb moved slightly across my knuckles. I looked at our hands. Something inside me softened. Then his phone vibrated again. Mason removed his hand. The warmth disappeared. He checked the message. His expression hardened. Derek wants to meet. Are you going? I don't know. I felt the old fear returning. What if he still has feelings for you? Mason stared at me. He doesn't. How do you know? Because I know what love feels like. The words stayed between us. My heart began beating faster. What does it feel like? Mason looked directly at me. It feels safe. I couldn't breathe for a second. Neither of us moved. Then Mason whispered, and I haven't felt safe with anyone for a long time. I looked down. My eyes suddenly burned. I hated how quickly he had reached places inside me that I had kept locked away. I don't want to be another person you lose, I said. You won't be. You can't promise that. No. He paused. But I can promise that I won't lie to you. That mattered more. Outside, the rain began to weaken. Inside the cabin, something between us had changed. Not completely. Not safely. But enough. Mason moved closer. Our hands found each other again. This time, neither of us hesitated. His fingers closed gently around mine. For a moment, the past disappeared. There was only the rain, the river, and the quiet warmth between us. Then Mason's phone rang. He answered. I couldn't hear the voice clearly, but I saw Mason's face change. His eyes moved toward me. Then he slowly stood. Who was it? I asked. He didn't answer immediately. Finally, he said, Derek. What did he want? Mason looked toward the window. He said he knows something about you. My heart stopped. About me? Mason nodded. He says your past isn't what you told me. I stood. That isn't true. I know. You believe me? Mason looked at me. I want to. Those 4 words hurt more than an accusation. I stepped away. The closeness we had built suddenly felt fragile. Mason reached toward me. Caleb. I stopped. He looked frightened. Not angry. Frightened. And somehow that scared me even more, because whatever Derek knew, it had already found its way between us. The river outside remained calm, but inside the boat, everything had changed. For the first time, I wondered whether the person I had started trusting was afraid of losing me, or afraid of discovering that I had never been what he thought I was. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. The rain had almost stopped outside, but I could still hear drops falling from the roof. Mason stood near the window. I stood across from him. The small cabin suddenly felt much smaller. What did Derek tell you? I finally asked. Mason looked down at his phone. He said you knew about him before you came here. I stared at him. I didn't. He says you knew my name. I didn't. He says you came looking for me. The accusation hurt because it sounded impossible. I shook my head. I didn't even know this place existed. Mason looked at me. I believe you. But his voice lacked confidence. That frightened me more than anger would have. You don't believe me. I want to. That isn't the same thing. He looked away. I felt something inside me break. After everything we had shared, after the stories we had told each other, one message from Derek had been enough to make Mason question me. Maybe that was what betrayal did. It taught you to see ghosts everywhere. I picked up my bag. Where are you going? Somewhere else. The storm isn't over. I'll manage. Mason stepped toward me. Caleb, wait. I turned. Why? Because I don't want you to leave like this. Then trust me. He became silent. I nodded slowly. That silence is your answer. I walked toward the door. Before I could open it, Mason spoke. I've been lied to before. I turned around. So have I. His eyes met mine. I don't know how to stop expecting it. I swallowed. Neither do I. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then I sat down again. Not because everything was okay. Because I knew what it felt like to leave while angry and regret it afterward. Mason sat opposite me. He looked exhausted. I should tell you everything, he said. I nodded. He took a deep breath. Derek didn't only take money. I waited. He took my confidence. Mason explained that after the business failed, Derek told people that Mason had been careless, that he had made the decisions, that the loss was his fault. For years, Mason believed those words. He stopped trusting his judgment. He stopped making plans. He even stopped allowing people to help him. The boat was all I had left, he said. I looked around the cabin. Suddenly, the old wood and faded seats seemed different. This wasn't just a boat. It was the place where Mason had rebuilt himself. I understand now, I said. Mason looked at me. But there's something else. My stomach tightened. What? He hesitated. Derek recently came back. Why? He says he wants forgiveness. And do you? Mason shook his head. No. Then why answer him? Because part of me still wants to know why. I understood that. Sometimes closure wasn't about forgiving someone. Sometimes you simply wanted an explanation for the pain they left behind. I looked at him. Did you love him? Once. Do you still? No. His answer was immediate. I believed him. Then I asked the question I had been afraid to ask. What about me? Mason went still. What about you? Why did you let me get this close? His eyes filled with something I couldn't name. I tried not to. Why? Because I started caring. My chest tightened. When? He gave a small, sad smile. The first night. I looked away. He continued. You were sitting there holding that cup of tea like it was the only warm thing left in the world. I smiled despite myself. I was cold. I know. He looked down. I just didn't expect to feel responsible for someone again. I moved closer. You weren't responsible for me. I know. He paused. I wanted to be there anyway. The words broke something open inside me. For months, I had believed I was difficult to love. Too guarded. Too damaged. Too afraid. Now someone was sitting in front of me saying he had chosen to care without being asked. I reached for his hand. He didn't pull away. Then I finally told him the part of my past I had never shared. My former partner hadn't simply left. He had spent months convincing me that I was the reason our relationship was failing. Whenever I questioned him, he called me insecure. Whenever I asked for honesty, he told me I was too demanding. Eventually, I stopped asking. I became quiet. I became smaller. Until one day, I realized I didn't recognize myself anymore. Mason's eyes softened. You shouldn't have had to become smaller to be loved. I looked at him. Neither should you. His eyes filled with tears. He looked away quickly. I squeezed his hand. You don't have to hide from me. I don't know how to do this. Neither do I. A faint smile appeared on his face. That's not very reassuring. It wasn't supposed to be. He laughed softly. For the first time that day, the tension loosened. Then his phone vibrated. We both looked at it. Another message from Derek. Mason opened it. His face changed. He handed me the phone. The message was short. Derek admitted that he had deliberately lied about me. He had seen Caleb's name in an old conversation connected to Mason's former partner. He had used that small connection to create suspicion. He wanted Mason frightened, alone, and emotionally dependent on the person who had betrayed him before. I looked at Mason. He wanted you to think I was part of it. Mason nodded. I should have known. No. He looked at me. You were afraid. So were you. I stepped closer. What matters is what we do now. Mason's eyes stayed on mine. I don't want to lose you. You haven't lost me. His face broke. Not dramatically. Just enough for me to see the exhaustion behind his eyes. He lowered his head. I am so tired of being afraid. I moved closer and placed my hand against his shoulder. You don't have to be afraid tonight. He looked up. Why? Because I'm still here. Mason closed his eyes. For a moment he simply breathed. Then he leaned closer. Our foreheads touched. Neither of us rushed the moment. There was no need. Everything we had been afraid to say was already there. Mason whispered, I think I've fallen for you. My heart shook. I think I fell first. He smiled. A real smile. The kind that reached his eyes. Then he kissed me. It was gentle. Brief. Almost uncertain. But it carried something much bigger than romance. Carried trust. When we pulled apart, Mason rested his forehead against mine. I don't know what happens next. Neither do I. That's frightening. A little. He smiled again. But maybe that's okay. Outside, the final drops of rain disappeared. The clouds began opening above the river. Sunlight slowly touched the water. Mason looked toward the opposite shore. We should finally cross. I nodded. This time, when he started the boat, I sat beside him. Not behind him. Not across from him. Beside him. The river stretched ahead. Calm. Bright. Waiting. I watched the shoreline move slowly behind us. For the first time, I wasn't thinking about where I had come from. I was thinking about where we might go. And somehow, that felt like the beginning of healing. I had seen it under darkness. I had heard it during the storm. I had watched rain disappear into its black surface. But now, sunlight moved across the water like a path. Mason stood at the controls. I sat beside him. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. We didn't need to. Something had changed between us during the night. Not everything was suddenly easy. The past had not disappeared. Derek was still somewhere behind us. My old relationship still lived inside certain memories. Mason still carried wounds he didn't know how to explain. But the fear between us had become quieter. That mattered. I watched the sunlight move across Mason's face. He looked tired. But lighter. Are you okay? I asked. He nodded. I think so. You don't sound sure. I haven't been sure about anything for a long time. I smiled. Then maybe that's progress. He looked at me. How? You admitted you're not sure. A small smile appeared on his face. I suppose you're right. The boat continued forward. The opposite shore grew closer. For some reason, I felt nervous. I had spent 2 nights waiting to reach this place. Now that we were almost there, I didn't want the journey to end. Mason must have noticed my silence. What are you thinking? That this feels strange. What does? Wanting to arrive somewhere and not wanting the journey to end. He smiled. I understand. The boat moved slowly toward the dock. When we finally reached it, Mason secured the rope. I stood with my bag. For a moment, neither of us moved. This was the moment I had been waiting for. I was supposed to step onto the shore and continue my new life. Instead, I looked at Mason. What happens now? He leaned against the side of the boat. I don't know. I laughed softly. You really love that answer. It happens to be honest. I appreciate that. He looked toward the small town beyond the dock. There is a cafe about 10 minutes from here. A cafe? Yes. Why? I haven't had breakfast. I stared at him. After everything that had happened, he was asking me to have breakfast. It was such an ordinary thing. Maybe that's why it mattered. Are you asking me to come with you? He shrugged. If you want. I smiled. I want. We walked away from the river together. The road was quiet. Morning had fully arrived. Small shops were opening. People moved along the sidewalks carrying bags and cups of coffee. Nobody knew what had happened on the boat. Nobody knew how close I had come to walking away. Nobody knew how much could change during 2 nights beside a river. We reached the cafe. Mason held the door open. I stepped inside. Warm air surrounded us. The smell of coffee and fresh bread filled the room. We found a table near the window. For a while, we talked about ordinary things. The weather. The town. The boat. Food. I realized how much I had missed ordinary conversations. There was no suspicion. No accusations. No painful history. Just 2 people sitting together. Mason looked across the table. What are you going to do now? I don't know. You have somewhere to stay? Yes. Work? I'll find something. He nodded. Then he asked quietly, will you stay in town? I looked at him. I don't know. His eyes lowered. I understood the question beneath the question. He wanted me to stay. But he was afraid to ask. I reached across the table. My fingers touched his. He looked at our hands. I haven't decided, I said. His face fell slightly. But I haven't decided to leave either. He looked up. A small smile appeared. That sounds like progress. It is. We stayed there for almost an hour. Eventually, Mason's phone rang. He looked at the screen. It was Derek. This time, Mason didn't hesitate. He answered. I couldn't hear everything, but I heard Mason say, no. A pause. Then, I don't owe you another chance. Another pause. Mason's expression remained calm. You made your choices. He listened again. Then he said something that surprised me. I forgive myself. His eyes closed briefly. I don't need you to forgive me. Then he ended the call. He placed the phone on the table. I didn't ask what Derek had said. I didn't need to. Mason had finally chosen himself. Not through anger. Not through revenge. Through peace. You okay? I asked. He nodded. I think that was the last piece. The last piece of what? The life I kept waiting to repair. I understood. Sometimes we don't stay trapped because we still love someone. Sometimes we stay because we want the ending to make sense. Mason had finally accepted that it didn't have to. We left the cafe shortly afterward. The river was visible from the road. I stopped walking. Mason looked at me. What? I was thinking about the first night. When you almost drowned? I laughed. I wasn't going to drown. You looked like you might. I was nervous. You were terrified. Maybe. He smiled. I looked toward the water. I thought crossing that river was the most important thing. And now? I turned toward him. Now I think I needed the night more than I needed the other side. His smile disappeared. His eyes became soft. Why? Because I met you. For a moment he said nothing. Then he stepped closer. He took my hand. This time, there was no hesitation. I was afraid you would leave. he said. I was afraid you would ask me to. I almost did. Why? Because wanting someone means giving them the power to hurt you. I squeezed his hand. That doesn't mean you stop wanting them. No. He looked at me. It means you choose honesty. I smiled. So if you get scared, I tell you. And if I get scared, you tell me. What if one of us wants to run? Mason smiled gently. Then we talk before we disappear. It wasn't a promise of forever. It wasn't a perfect ending. It was something better. It was honest. We began walking again. The sun was higher now. Behind us, the river continued moving. I thought about everything it had carried away. Fear, anger, old memories. The version of me who believed betrayal meant I was impossible to love. That version of me was still there somewhere. But he no longer controlled me. Mason walked beside me. Our hands remained together. I didn't know where this relationship would lead. Maybe we would make mistakes. Maybe fear would return. Maybe there would be difficult days. But for once, I wasn't demanding certainty from the future. I was simply allowing myself to be present. And that was new. Later that afternoon, Mason took me back to the boat. I stood on the shore while he prepared to leave. You'll come back tomorrow? He asked. I smiled. You're asking? I suppose I am. Then yes. He nodded. The boat moved slowly away from the dock. I watched him until he became smaller against the sunlight. Then he raised one hand. I raised mine. The river flowed between us. But it no longer felt like something separating us. It felt like the place where everything had changed. That night, I finally understood something. Betrayal had taught me to build walls. Loneliness had convinced me those walls were protection. But Mason showed me that healing didn't mean opening every door to everyone. It meant learning who deserved the key. I had crossed the river because I thought I was escaping my past. Instead, I had found someone who made me believe in the future. We had spent one night waiting for morning. Neither of us knew that morning would become the beginning of us.